Good afternoon. We'll get started in just a minute while folks are joining us. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Trace Haythorne, Executive Director for ACPE. We're delighted that you can join us as a part of this ACPE Proud Week for a webinar titled CPE for Leaders, a Training Model for Healthcare Managers and Directors. Joe Hirschman, David Fleener, and Chris Berner will lead this for us today. If you have questions, please place them in the question box. Chris will facilitate some questions after David and Joe have had a chance to do some presentation. If you have specific needs for tech support, please put something in the chat box and I will do my best to try to respond to those. You know that we must be spread thin today if they've got me doing tech support. So we'll do our very best to make sure that everybody can be a part of this. We are recording this webinar, so it will be available afterwards. And we do want to say a special word of thanks to Joe, David, and Chris for their willingness to serve as a part of this week and to share with us their experience in this training model. So with no further ado, let me hand it over to you all. Thanks again so much for being here. And if any questions come up, go to the question box. Anything that you need tech support wise, please go to the chat box.
Hi everyone. So I think you can all see my screen. Trace, can you just let me know if this view is working?
You're good to go. Thanks, Joe.
Right, fantastic. Okay, so I'm really excited to be here. First of all, congratulations to the ACPE on this whole week, on launching a new website, creating a new SharePoint system, like all today, and leading this webinar. My colleague Chris and I co-led this CPE for Leaders program, and David is my certified educator colleague here at Mount Sinai. He led a focus group with the first cohort of participants. What we'd like to do today is tell you a little bit about the development and design of the program. We'll talk about the focus group findings, and we'll connect the work that we did to some other leadership models that might be a helpful way of thinking about this. We'll talk for about 35 minutes, and then we're really excited to have a conversation with all of you. We know that as certified educators, we're always looking for ways to deepen our work and our relevance at our institutions, and we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback and input. So we developed CPE for Leaders, which is a program for managers and directors at the hospital where I work, Mount Sinai Beth Israel in New York City, in the context of some other similar leadership initiatives at our hospital. So it fit into a broader context of interest in this kind of work. This is not a program to train leaders to be chaplains. The central skill is attunement to self and others, which is a skill that we teach to people who are becoming chaplains, and it seems to be a pretty transferable skill for anybody who does a lot of communication in their daily work. We consulted with colleagues Sean Mai and Kyle Vlack, who led a similar program at Alina Health in Minneapolis. Sean is now chair-elect of the ACPE, and we're really grateful for all of their thoughtful input and insights when we were first thinking about how to develop this program. We've run 2 extended units. The second unit just finished yesterday. It went on hiatus for a few months during the COVID surge in the New York area, and we were able to finish it. And we have plans for a 3rd extended unit that will begin in the autumn. The program had a high level of support and investment from our hospital's leadership from the very beginning, which was essential because we were asking participants to be unavailable for a full afternoon every week. And we recruited participants both through people stepping up and letting us know they were interested, and through executive leaders and directors identifying people in their work areas, emerging leaders whom they thought would be good candidates for the program. I led the CPE pieces of it, the verbatim seminars, and an adapted format process group. And Chris led most of the didactics, which took the form of a book group, and we'll tell you about the books that we read. We adapted ACPE's level 1 learning outcomes for this program, and here in pink you can see the parts of the learning outcomes that we changed. So for 311.1, we thought more broadly about ethical, humanistic, spiritual, philosophical, or existential values that might undergird a person's work in healthcare. We changed language around pastoral functioning simply to work in healthcare. 311.3 and 311.4, we kept exactly the same. Those skills are important across many different contexts. The same with 311.5 and 311.6. For 311.7, you can see we changed initiating helping relationships simply to working effectively. 311.8, we kept the same, and I presented the clinical method of learning to the students at the beginning. And then in 311.9, we simply changed pastoral formation to professional formation. The students participated in verbatim seminars. As in most units of CPE, that was really the heart and soul of the work that we did together. We had an open agenda group that was similar to the kind of process group that I do when I'm training chaplains. In lieu of a theological reflection paper, students brought a values paper. Some students did draw on religious or spiritual values when writing that. Others drew on different kinds of values that had a more secular flavor. The students write final evaluations, and so do I. I met with the students for one-on-ones, and I'm going to hand things over to Chris, who will tell us about the book group. So these are the books that we read in the first cohort and also in the second cohort too.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, David, and thank you, Joe. I do want the record to be accurate. When Joe says that we co-led the course, it really means that Joe did all of the work and I showed up occasionally. This really was something that Joe did all of the heavy lifting, all of the thought around it, and she invited me to simply talk about the things that I like to talk about. So Joe, it's really all about you and the colleagues that surround you here at Sinai, who gave you the space and the time to do this work. So for that, David, I'm grateful too. The 3 books that I did talk to the 2 cohorts about are very important to me. They do touch upon some key leadership attributes that we at the hospital are really trying to sort of model and grow here. The first book you see here on the screen is Patrick Lencioni. Fundamentally, he is all about leadership starts with trust, and in order to engender trust, a leader has to be ready to demonstrate vulnerability. And if you can start there, you can escalate upwards to more and more productive and honest conversations within your team, to get much better commitment from everyone, much less fear around conflict, and much more productive kind of conflict. And then everybody is aiming at the same result. It's actually a fable. But it's a very interesting fable because in the fable, each of the characters plays out a certain kind of behavior that, as a leader, it's really, really important that the leader address. I don't know how to advance the slides. Is that done magically? David Marks and Dave's Subs is also a fable. And it's a fable about creating a culture in a work team which is not punitive, which embraces the idea that human error is inevitable, and the goal of a leader is to create an environment in which we create really good systems that sort of reduce the risk of human error and really are able to distinguish between what is human error and what's risky behavior and what's reckless behavior. It really is it's the lodestar of an approach to safety called just culture in healthcare. Many institutions across the U.S. are actively involved with creating what's called just culture, not just in healthcare, by the way, but in almost any safety-sensitive environment. Just culture has applications. For me as an HR guy, just culture also helps me evaluate all types of human choices and all types of human behavior, not just clinical care, but just the way we treat one another and the way we carry out our duties from day to day. I do recommend it, by the way. And I feel like can you move it to the next slide? This particular book, I probably should have started with. This is the book that we start with in the session. I've never met Rasmus Hugard or Jacqueline Carter, but if I did, I would fall to the ground and say, we're not worthy, much like Wayne's World. I really recommend this book. I can't say that Hugard and Carter have original ideas per se, but they organize a whole lot of research and focus on the qualities of mindfulness, selflessness, and compassion as key attributes for leaders. And fundamentally, the way they organize it, they say, look, being a really good leader is fundamentally and only about managing yourself well. And if you can manage yourself, you can then move on to managing your team with those same qualities. And if you can manage yourself and manage your team, you have a fair shot at really, over time, changing your whole organization. But I feel like in the sessions, we kept on coming back to mindfulness most of all, and really being able to manage emotions in a moment and being able to recognize them. The verbatims, my sense is the verbatims are really sort of exercises after the fact about were you managing yourself in the moment, and where did you stop managing yourself effectively. And I'll stop there.
Chris, actually, if you would talk about this slide as well, the significance of the program for Mount Sinai Beth Israel, that would be great.
Sure. I'm sorry, Joe. Why are we doing it here in Beth Israel? Well, we are on this sort of remarkable journey. Beth Israel is one hospital in a 8-hospital system across New York City. Beth Israel is sort of in a unique situation. We are actively making ourselves smaller. We're intending to go from around 220 beds down to probably around 140 beds. We were in a 4-year process to actively dismantle our hospital without doing any layoffs, but moving whole work teams and whole units to other hospitals. or if we were simply eliminating the service, we were doing that and guaranteeing that no one was going to be laid off. We were going to find them a job in one of our sister hospitals. That's a very challenging process, very gut-wrenching. We're taking apart work teams, we're taking apart work families. We're managing a high degree of entropy, a high degree of uncertainty. And we really we were deliberately thinking about, we need to be very different managers to manage such complexity and such volatility. We really needed to be much better at managing ourselves, much more comfortable with sharing information past our comfort level, acknowledging mistakes, because we had to make a lot of course changes and course corrections in this process. So Joe's idea really fit in well with having to grow a very different kind of leader. And I would say, if I may, I think what Joe has really discovered by adapting pastoral education for a non-pastoral audience is she's really created a model in which hardwires these kind of reflective behaviors, and people get the kind over the course, they get some rigorous feedback, some rigorous coaching from peers, and they can't escape. They can't blow off the work. So it's hard work on personal growth, but they are doing it in a context of the safety of several peers. And I think where a lot of people sort of read these books with good intentions to be different, Joe's created a setting where people act on those good intentions and are held accountable by others to improve themselves, which is very, very, very clever. And now I'm stopped, Joe.
Great, thank you. And David, thanks for picking up here.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Chris. So my role in all of this was simply to conduct or facilitate a focus group, which was, I believe, 90 minutes. It's been a while. So to facilitate this focus group with the students, and to do so, we used a semi-structured open-ended interview questions. Once we had the audio recording, we had it transcribed by a professional transcription service. And then two of us worked as coders, myself and Rabbi Rachel Van Tyne, who is a certified educator candidate here in the Mount Sinai Health System, to see if we could reach consensus on themes. Next slide, please. So for this focus group, we had 6 students, 4 who were cisgender women, 2 cisgender men, 4 Black, 1 Latinx, and 1 white. And they represented a range of disciplines and leadership within those disciplines. Next slide. We asked 7 questions of the participants, and in the next section I'll go over their results. But for this section, I just want to review the questions that we asked. And the first one was about their reason for joining the program. Next slide. With the next question, we wanted to understand how they experienced several of the components of the program, such as verbatims, individual supervision, and others that you can see here are pretty common staples in any CPE program. Next slide. The third question focused on specific leadership competencies and how they assess their own growth in these areas. So for example, we asked them about the development of their self-awareness, their stress management, and so on. Next slide. We also wanted to better understand the feedback participants had received from their direct reports, their colleagues, their bosses, during and since taking CPE for Leaders. Next slide. We asked this 5th question because, as Chris mentioned, their institution was in the midst of a significant transformation project, and we were curious how CPE for Leaders had helped them manage the transition with themselves and with their teams. Next slide. For the 6th question, we were curious about what they saw as the key strengths and weaknesses from the program and what we could learn from that. And finally, we wanted to know if they would recommend the program to others, and if so, or if not, why or why not. So what did we learn? In a nutshell, we learned a lot. Their responses revolved around 7 themes that emerged throughout the focus group interview, which we'll turn to now. So the name of the course, CPE for Leaders, was unclear to them. They weren't sure what that meant. And interestingly, some initially thought that it meant they'd meet with a priest. And that's somewhat particular to the New York City area, having a high concentration of Roman Catholics in this area. Oftentimes when people hear the word chaplain or pastoral, their mind automatically goes to priest. So some thought, is this a program where I meet with a priest on a regular basis? And in fact, it wasn't. But what brought clarity was meeting with Joe and Chris to discuss what the course actually was. And this led to some enthusiasm in the prospective students. You can see from the quotes here. It appears that an effective way of promoting this program was through meeting with the prospective students in advance to let them know that what the course was really about and who the teachers would be. Next slide. The second theme that emerged was that none of them could have invested their time into a unit of CPE unless they had the support of their senior leaders. This point was critical. Unless they had support from their leaders, there was no way they could have engaged such a demanding program. All of you who are with us today know the demands of a CPE program. Imagine inviting people into a 400-hour program or even a half unit of this program in a healthcare context. It's an enormous commitment. From the quote on the slide, though, you can see that one participant believed that their leader thought the return on the investment made sense. Next slide. Another theme underscored how important it was to have skilled and caring facilitators. So critical to the effectiveness of this program was a relational approach characterized by emotional intensity and insight. Any of us who are CPE certified educators know that this is part and parcel of any CPE program, and it's no different with a group of non-clergy, or in this case, a group of healthcare leaders. Next slide. A key takeaway from this course was the experience of connecting with peers in a professional context. Participants valued the peer support that was fostered by the relational context of this program, and they felt nurtured by it. Next slide. Several participants shared the sentiment that they believed that they had to hide their emotions to be effective leaders. But this course helped them connect more deeply with their emotions and see them as assets for leadership. CPE for Leaders helped them trust themselves and others more. The opportunity to learn in a context in which there was high trust enabled them to be more honest with themselves and others, which aided their growth. Next slide. Participants indicated that as a result of the program, they were less anxious in the midst of the significant changes of the transformation that was taking place, and that they were able to model that for their direct reports. So it brings to mind the idea of non-anxious presence and how effective that can be, not just in pastoral care, but in leadership. They described acquiring increased abilities to listen to their staff and to take a larger perspective on the organization, shifting their focus from the individual to the whole system. I think that's an important part of just culture, and an important part of theories about systems is it's non-pathologizing, right? It's about, let's look at the larger system and the forces here that are prompting some of our behavior, rather than pointing out, oh, this is a bad employee, this is a bad person. Let's look at the system. Next slide. And then the greatest weakness of the program was the absence of a follow-up program. And I think that says a lot about the quality of this program and how enthusiastic they were at the end of it. They were adamant that they wanted to continue meeting together after the program ended for ongoing support and education. And when senior leadership heard this, to their credit, they were very supportive. They allocated funds for it, and they made that happen. I'll turn it back over to you, Joe.
Thanks, David. So we looked in the organizational development and the human psychology literature to understand a little bit about other leadership models. And while we aren't ready to say, oh, we're definitely, subscribing to this particular model, I'm going to talk us through a couple of different models that I think provide some insight into why CPE for leaders might be effective in this context, and also into how it doesn't stand alone. Many other people, the people who wrote the books that we read in the program, and people in this whole field of organizational development have thought a lot about what makes good leaders. So one model that is appealing and of interest is authentic leadership, which is associated with the work of Avolio and Gardner. And they say that there are 4 characteristics of leaders who practice authentic leadership, and those are self-awareness, balanced processing, relational transparency, and authentic behavior and action. Quite a bit has been written about authentic leadership in the field of healthcare, particularly in relation to nurse leaders. The American Association of Critical Care Nurses has adopted authentic leadership as one of its 6 standards for creating healthy work environments. And I summarized here a couple of studies that show that one study showed that nurse executives exhibited leadership styles that could be associated with authentic leadership. Another study showed that there's a significant and negative relationship between burnout and authentic leadership. And another study showed that when nurse managers practice authentic leadership, that fosters learning and vitality among frontline nurses. Shirey reviewed the literature on authentic leadership, and I'm going to read this whole thing because Shirey could have been writing about CPE. The process of becoming an authentic leader appears to be a journey rather than a destination. To become an authentic leader requires that an individual pursue a personal journey of self-discovery, self-improvement, reflection, and renewal. To become an authentic leader, a person must develop an individual leadership style that is consistent with his or her personality and character. Becoming an authentic leader requires courage to commit to a process of personal transformation from the inside out. Becoming an authentic leader, however, does not dismiss the importance of professional competence and the need to build knowledge in one's discipline. Both professional and personal mastery are needed for success as an authentic leader. Similarly, understanding one's strengths and weaknesses while simultaneously accepting one's shadow side is an essential component of becoming an authentic leadership. So I think for those of us who are certified educators, the idea of a personal journey, of the need to build professional competencies and skills alongside personal growth and change, that we might want to develop a chaplaincy style that's congruent with whom we are on the inside, and that we need to get to know our shadow sides. I think probably all of those things are somewhat familiar to us. Drawing on some of the content from the focus groups and then some of the literature on authentic leadership, the students in the focus groups reported an increased awareness of their emotions and reduced reactivity, which could be associated with self-awareness and with balanced processing. And they also described increased transparency and vulnerability, which could be associated with authentic behavior and action. There's another set of leadership skills that I bracketed together, relational, person-centered, and emotionally intelligent leadership styles. I think have some characteristics in common. Among nursing leaders, one study showed that that relational and people-centered leadership styles were associated with greater job satisfaction among nurse leaders compared, not among the nurse leaders, among the nurses whom they manage, compared to nurse leaders who have a more task-focused leadership style. And a couple of studies have found a positive relationship among emotional intelligence, a transformational leadership style, and positive leadership traits, which in these cases were listed as extra effort, effectiveness, and satisfaction. And again, this refers to positive leadership traits among the people whom the leaders manage. In the world of CPE, there's quite a bit of interest right now in emotional intelligence, and some of our colleagues are leading a study right now looking at the relationship between CPE and emotional intelligence. So we're grateful to Chaba and Chaba Shilaji, Kristen Langstradt, and Paul Galchert, and we really look forward to seeing the outcome of that study. And as many of us know, Jankowski and colleagues did a study in 2009 that showed some growth in emotional intelligence in intensive CPE units, not in extended CPE units in that particular study. CPE's learning style is relational and person-centered and emotionally intelligent. And so a question for future exploration might be, do people who've gone through CPE training, whether to become chaplains or in a leadership setting, do they adopt and exhibit these traits outside and beyond the CPE classroom? The final area of leadership that we looked at is mindfulness, and there's a massive body of literature about mindfulness and how it can help us be more effective in many aspects of our life. Some of this lives in the field of neuroscience, some of it lives in the organizational development field, and here are a couple of studies from outside the healthcare field that suggest that mindfulness at work is related to a number of things that I think all of us value and would like to have more of. So less emotional exhaustion, greater job satisfaction, and greater psychological capital, which in one study was identified as hope, efficacy, resilience, and optimism. In our CPE for Leaders program, mindfulness was a recurrent theme. As Chris described, it's a central theme in the first book that we read in both of the cohorts, and it remains to be seen if CPE's learning methodology enhances mindfulness back in the workplace for people who've gone through the CPE for Leaders program. So we will pause here. I'm going to unshare my screen, and we would love to really enter into a conversation with all of you. So, Chris, I think you can see the questions, and Trace, we would love to know if there are questions that you think we should respond to.
Yeah, Chris, if you'll start with the questions that are in the box, I think you've got three. A couple of them are pretty easy to answer. There's a question about student numbers, a CPE question, and then Connie Bonner's got a question after that. So if you want to start with those, and then I've got a couple of other follow-ups.
Yeah, actually, I apologize. I actually don't see any questions in my box. I see. I don't.
Then let me jump right into that.
I'm so sorry,
No
Tracy.
worries. So how many students did you have on average in a peer group?
We had 5 in the we had 6 in the first peer group. The second peer group, we began with 7. We took a 3-month hiatus, and 2 students were not able to come back as a lot of things changed over the course of the COVID crisis. So we finished the second cohort with 5 students. We plan to recruit 6 for the third cohort.
And did they get a unit of CPE when they completed this?
They did, and my apologies for not making that explicit. Yes, they did. They got a real unit of CPE, and that's one of the things that we use to encourage people to do the program. And we hope that they will consider it as something that that looks good on their resume and that they can use to market themselves.
Nice. We have 3 questions about tuition and whether there was a tuition fee.
No, it was part of their daily work, and we provided 100 hours of education time, and the 300 clinical hours were, the countless hours that they put in every week to doing their jobs.
Could you share more about the time commitment for those who were in the program?
So class was 4 hours a week. It's a really big time commitment. So we worked with managers to make sure that they really understood what they and their direct report was signing up for. And they also did a lot of reading and writing, as CPE students tend to do. They presented 5 verbatims. They did a values presentation. They wrote a final evaluation, and they read 3 books. So it was a really significant time commitment.
So were there specific educational requirements for this program? I'm assuming they mean prerequisites. Like, did they need to have some specific educational background before they came in?
No, they didn't. They needed to be a supervisor, manager, or director. For the first cohort, all the students came from our hospital, Mount Sinai Beth Israel. For the second cohort, we had students from a couple of other hospitals in our health system, and they did not need to have a master's degree. They did not need necessarily to have direct reports, but the program works particularly well for people who do have direct reports, who are managing a team and who have a real sphere of influence in their daily work.
Great, thank you. So could you name when you began this, were there some specific outcomes that you all had named that you were hoping that might be different from a typical level 1?
Is it helpful for me to go back to those slides?
Just to point out that we've got it in the slides.
Yeah. So we did rework the level 1 learning outcomes, and about half of the outcomes really translate beautifully beyond chaplaincy training, and about half of them we needed to change the wording a little bit. I know that we have colleagues who have run CPE programs for physicians, maybe for nurses, for people in other disciplines who want to learn how to be spiritual care generalists. That was not what this program is. This program is really around helping people be more effective leaders in their clinical setting, and the core skill is attunement to self and others, which, as I said earlier, is a skill for chaplains, and it turns out that it's also just a really useful skill for a lot of other people as well.
David noted several key findings from the focus groups. Someone is wondering whether that some of what you've learned from these folks and in working with these folks will circle back to your colleagues in terms of teaching ACPE students about leadership as chaplains in healthcare settings.
That is such a great question. I don't know. I mean, there's like so much work that could be done, right? Maybe this is the beginning of some of that. Like chaplains do play leadership roles. I think that that's true of, I'm thinking of the staff chaplains whom I supervise here. We count on them to really help us understand what's happening on the ground. Like, what is staff saying? What is staff struggling with? How could the hospital do better? What kinds of communication is working and not working? And our staff chaplains participate in leadership meetings and sit on committees. So yeah, I love that question. David and Chris, I'd love to hear what you think about that also.
The only thing I'm thinking of is, I know that just this week, I think it was the Journal of Healthcare Chaplaincy, a new paper came out about the competencies of chaplaincy managers and directors. It was a collaboration of University of Alabama, Birmingham, and Rush University. I've only read the abstract, but now it makes me think that we should put that paper in conversation with what we found here and see what we can learn.
And you all mentioned that you used verbatims through this. Were the students simply engaging in conversations with their reports or with other colleagues within their different areas of responsibility?
Yeah, that's a great question. Chris, I just want to see, did you want to jump in on that leadership question?
No, thank you though.
We asked the students to bring verbatims of conversations they had at work that they wish had gone differently. Conversations that they could tell they could have done something differently. They were unsettled in some way by the conversation. They were decentered by it. And so students brought conversations with direct reports, with peers, and with their own leaders. They also sometimes brought email exchanges. I think we all have had email exchanges that we wish, had not gone the way they did. And we were really focusing on how finding a way to draw closer in relationship in those conversations might help the conversations go a little bit better.
Thank you. How'd you recruit the students? How'd you advertise for this?
So there's like the pre-COVID and the post-COVID way, right? So pre-COVID, we used to all meet together in different configurations every week or every other week. And we put together some promotional materials. We publicized the program. We sent out broadcasts. I spoke with different groups of executive leaders about the program. I met with leaders one-on-one to ask them to identify people who would benefit from the program. And that we're still doing all those same things, but a lot of it is now happening over Zoom. We also, in all 3 cohorts, so looking ahead to the cohort that is going to begin, students have always come forward and say, oh, I really want to do this. And those, the leaders who step forward to do that are more likely to be white, and they're more likely to be male. So we have made a particular effort to reach colleagues of color, particularly women of color, who may be less likely to step up and say, oh, this is really the program for me. Like, this is the program I've been waiting for you to run. And in our health system, as is true across the country, since the death of George Floyd, there's really a renewed focus on racism and anti-racism, and a different kind of commitment, I think, to bring about change this time. So we are being really explicit about this 3rd cohort, that we that we are particularly seeking the participation of colleagues of color. And we also recognize that Chris and I are both white, and that's a real limitation of the program in its first 2 iterations. So we expanded the faculty. We're partnering with some colleagues of color, 2 of whom are alumni of the first program. And we may also need to rework what we read. We may need to read books that have, or listen to podcasts that have a different, that have an analysis of race and racism and power in a way that that I think we were not really focused on in the first two units. We were presenting some leadership models that are important and inspiring and changed us, but somewhat colorblind in their approach.
There's a question here specifically for Chris. Most of the folks in the webinar are steeped in the culture of ACPE and know this model of education well. What was it that convinced you to know this was worth trying, and how would you suggest that folks speak to their colleagues about such a program in their own institutions?
So great question. And I also just wanted to circle back briefly. I did want to also point out that we did turn some students away based upon Joe's interview of them, that we didn't think that they had a different set of expectations. We did also have to manage when we were recruiting students. We were small enough so that we had to be aware of relationships and lines of reporting that we kind of had to either deconflict within the classroom, or sort of say we can't have both of these people in the same class. So that was kind of unexpected. It was also great because it means we had more interest than we could accommodate. So we had to sort of explicitly manage that in a way that maybe other programs don't have to worry so much about pre-existing relationships. Also, we had to emphasize too that this was not a course to rehabilitate leaders or punish them. You know, this was not a say you better shape up and we're going to send you to CPE for leaders. It wasn't a real problem, but we did have to remind people that this was not that. This was not a penalty box. But the question is as a non-CPE person, I was intrigued. You know, Joe is such an amazing leader down here. We were incredibly grateful that she came forward with this idea. My first reaction was like, 400 hours? Are you kidding me? Do you really want to do this? So we had to create the space for Joe to do that. I remember when Joe asked me to participate, I did ask Joe, do you remember? I said, do I have to believe in God? Like, is that a prerequisite? And she said no. And I do think that's sort of, by the way, a window into, some people did wonder what this was about. Did you have to be religious to do this? So part of the messaging and recruitment is no, but it's a methodology. We're adopting a CPE methodology to have these very powerful conversations. I think the verbatim is an amazing device. And again, I think those authors that I showed you in the slides earlier, like those authors should be writing about the verbatim. I mean, by a show of hands, I see 77 people listening. I bet you 60 of us have either had a New Year's resolution, or many of us have had a coach at some point. I have a coach. I never do what the coach asks me to do, right? He says, go off and give me a list, top things, you know, give me a list of X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, definitely going to do that. Not. The verbatim process it's rigorous. It's tiring. It's exhausting. You all know that. So I really feel like Joe should trademark this, market it, and become a millionaire, and just take it on board, because there's a rigor to what CPE does that you know, professional executive coaches, I think, really should be copying.
I just want to say something about the name. So the first focus group finding, right, was that the name is really confusing, and it is. It's totally confusing. The CPE part is confusing. Like, what does that even stand for? And then clinical pastoral education is even more confusing. While a part of me would love to change the name, I don't really think I can because I'm an ACPE certified educator and I need to be working within my certification and within my area of expertise. And I think already when we're teaching chaplaincy students, students experience us as being like therapists, as being like coaches, but I'm not either of those things. I could be, but I'm not. I'm not trained as a therapist. I'm not licensed or certified as a coach. So for me, it feels pretty important to keep the name as it is, because what I'm offering is something really specific that grows out of my training and certification to be an ACPE certified educator. Like, I could pretend I was a coach and offer something different that had a different name, but the same outcome, but I'm really not. I'm not a coach. I'm not any of those other things.
Thanks. There was a question about whether you all would be willing to share what format you used for your verbatim. And I guess the follow-up to that is it any different than the verbatim format you use with other students?
It is different. It's similar, but different. It's tailored to the kind of context that we are working in. I will say that, like, really the only didactic that I teach is on parts theory on internal family systems, which is one of the first didactics that I teach to chaplaincy students. And it's important to me that the CPE for Leaders students have a working knowledge of parts theory and can use it in their verbatim. And I would be glad to share it. I can also share the final evaluation template. And so Trace, in whatever form would be helpful, I'm glad to share those.
That'd be great. We could post that with the recording as well as with the slides from the presentation if you all are open to that.
Yeah.
We did have a question as well that has come back around. A couple of folks are curious about what role, if any, theology played. And maybe that's for you as the educator as well as for what got played out in the group, because Chris made it pretty clear how comfortable he is with that conversation.
Yes. So, there's just like a whole series of conversations that we have been told not to have at work, and it turns out that actually we have to have these conversations at work. So one of those conversations is talking about racism at work. And Chris, something I've heard you say a lot over the last couple of months is, in HR we were told, like, never talk about race and racism, and it turns out that's not right. And one of the focus group findings that you presented, David, one of the quotes, I think, is about the realization that it's okay to talk about my feelings at work. I was told not to do this, but actually there's a place for it. And in the cohort that just finished yesterday, one of the takeaways for a couple of those students was that they thought they needed to leave their deep spiritual lives at the door when they came to work, and they've realized that actually there might be a place for some of that at work, that the things that sustain us and keep us grounded, that it may be okay to share some of that with our colleagues.
Yeah,
jump in, Chris.
If I may, I know we're close to the end, but I'm curious. First, in the first cohort, one of the students was a minister when he was off duty here, and that was really powerful. He brought a lot of explicit scriptural references into the conversation that I actually think was really good. And I think it was really excellent that he, and it had a feedback effect that he would bring in scripture and other people would start sharing some of their religious upbringing or religious perspective into it. It was curious how it became part of the conversation. It freed me up in the teachings to talk about my religious training. I'm not religious, but I would call myself religious curious. It allowed me to talk about that. So, and one last thing is, I would be interested if we did this in a different part of the country, would it be different? There's an old joke in recruitment that, if you get recruited into the Midwest, the recruiter says, when you get there, they're going to say, "Oh, welcome. What church do you go to?" Because it is simply a thing people ask new neighbors, right? And it is simply part of it's part of what happens there, and it's not something that happens in New York. So I'm very curious as to how this would be received in other parts of the country.
Yeah, I would imagine that there are some that would even say, "Rabbi, what church do you go to?" So it would get very confusing in a hurry. Just one quick detailed question that I want to share a comment and we'll wrap up. I'm not sure we heard how long this lasted. It was the 400 hours, but how did you spread this out in terms of the other work responsibilities of the folks who participated?
They were 26-week programs. So the first one went for about 6 months, and the second one went for a lot longer because we had to pause during COVID.
And you mentioned Sean Mai earlier. He shared that they had similar outcomes for their two groups of leaders, their hospital president and the first cohort. The hospital president noted that the first members of the first cohort became really important leaders during a painful 8-week nurses strike. Sean just concluded that comment with noting this model of education has great potential, and this kind of experimentation with it and exploration of its usage in other contexts could be really valuable, not just to the association, but to these contexts where we serve. So I want to say a word again of thanks to all three of you. First, for the courage to dive into something like this. For the fortitude to stay with it, especially through the last several months that you've had. For those who are on the webinar, if you simply Google Chaplain and Mount Sinai, you will find over a dozen different articles that have been picked up around the country. I think it's really remarkable work that this team has done, as has their communications office. They've done a very nice job of telling the story of what it's been like for these folks. We will have this recording posted next week along with the slides and that verbatim sample, or at least the format of how that works. And if you have other questions, feel free to reach out to Joe or David and they can help you get in touch with Chris as well. Thanks to everybody again for participating today. Have a great ACPE Proud Week. We're delighted to be with you. And again, let us know if you have further questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you.